I'm Julie, and I run Ariadne Capital and founded Entrepreneur Country. And this morning, in the next 20 minutes, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we're doing at Entrepreneur Country and why I think the future is one of consumer data as an asset class. I'm going to take you through some slides here in a kind of circuitous journey to understand the way that we think. If you'd like a copy of these slides, just send me an email later, and I'll be happy to get them to you. Here we go. And the little clicker. Click. There we go. I wrote about all of this in a book called Welcome to Entrepreneur Country. If you ask me what's Entrepreneur Country, it's the future. Entrepreneur Country is where entrepreneurs go to devise the future, to bring their visions of the future, what they understand to be inevitable, to the present. And as we all know, it's really about how shift happens. A lot of people think, excuse my French, shit happens. They think that stuff is happening in the industry and they can't understand it. But really that's because shift is happening. And we've all seen a slide like this before, where somewhere between 1900 and 1913, the streets were full of horses and then they moved to cars. Entrepreneurs were already at the stage of building the cars when most people were still riding those horses. So that's what we do in Entrepreneur Country, is we make the next version of the future happen. So I'd like to tell you about 3 versions of the future here. And we're firmly situated in that third version of the future. The first version of the future is one where the technology platform companies, and most of those are based out in Palo Alto, the Facebook, Apple, Amazon, and Googles of the world, are firmly intent on taking over every industry. And they're making the money because they're platforms. The second version of the future is that the baby brothers, which are not really baby brothers anymore, the Airbnbs, the Ubers, and so forth, are also, as platform companies, intent on disrupting major industries. But the question I started asking myself about one economic cycle ago in the financial downturn was a really pretty basic question. I just simply said to myself, okay, so that's about 25 companies. What happens to the rest of the world? 9/10 of the world, 99.9 of the world, is not those 25 companies out in Palo Alto. So therefore, what happens to them? Clearly, they don't all go bankrupt. Clearly, they don't all just, swoop off to a little niche. So therefore, how do they win? How do they figure out the future? Is there a sustainable model for the non-technology traditional, pick your sector, bank, insurance company, automotive company, retailer, etc. And what I'm going to share with you is what I believe is the third version of the future, which is a powerful vision of design of how Europeans can keep ecosystems in Europe. So, I have to disclose something, I'm afraid. I'm from Palo Alto, so I grew up in Palo Alto. So if I should have a bias, it should be to go to Palo Alto or to have stayed in Palo Alto. But I came over at age 21, a long time ago, to live in Paris. I went to INSEAD, and I've been in London for 18 years. So I've spent most of my adult life in Europe. And so we're not going to talk about going to Palo Alto this morning. We're going to talk about going to Entrepreneur Country. But really, it's about this little guy, right? And I'm sure that resonates with many of you. I have to admit that that's my face too. That is the face of every entrepreneur. The more you tell him or her that he can't do something, the more that they may not necessarily tell you, but they're thinking to themselves, you just keep telling me that I can't do that, and I will show you in the fullness of time that I will do that. In fact, through Ariadne Capital, the investment firm that I manage, we have over 15 years helped entrepreneurs, and what most of them do is they have a little slide deck that they keep to the side of the date that they achieved the things that people in the industry told them that they would not be able to do. And they pull that slide deck out at some sort of big milestone and say, you know what, we just wanted to let you know the dates that we hit the various milestones. Now, I'm going to give you 2 good reasons, and for this audience, I do realize I'm speaking to the converted a bit here. But you need to tell everybody that you meet what the 2 good reasons are that they need to care about the face of that little guy as well. Because a lot of people still think that entrepreneurship is for a small group of people, and they don't realize how central it is to society. We have a saying at Ariadne Capital that society works best when it's organized around the entrepreneur. Society works best when it's organized around the entrepreneur. And that is because entrepreneurs see the future. Every entrepreneur has a secret. They know something that has not gone mainstream. And what they do is they live in that future. They go to entrepreneur country every day. And the real reason why everybody needs to care about the face of that little guy and to understand the central role of entrepreneurs is because entrepreneurs are willing to live abnormal lives to bring that future to the present. So we decided to issue a global invitation to everybody to go where entrepreneurs live, for everybody to go to the future and to go across that tech discontinuity, which for the people who are in those Goliath businesses, who are in that 9/10 of the industry that I was worried about or concerned about or asking about 8 years ago, we're inviting them to go where entrepreneurs go every single day. So, capital follows ideas. You know, a lot of entrepreneurs get very obsessed with the fact that they start off and they don't have that much money, right? I know when I was 21 years old and I went to Paris, didn't have any money, and I remember a very good friend of mine at the time said, "Stop worrying about the money will find you." I thought it was really ridiculous at age 21 when somebody told me about it, but I'll tell you, the past 25 years have been the biggest object lesson for me of the less you worry about the money and the more you focus on what you're meant to deliver to the world, the more the money finds you. And capital follows ideas is one of the central tenets throughout history. The people, whether it was Christopher Columbus, who discovered the New World, or Leonardo da Vinci, who painted the Sistine Chapel, the people who have created the future, that creative genius which has always existed in humanity. It hasn't always been called entrepreneurs, sometimes it's been called adventurers or artists or industrialists, but that group of people who live in the future, who are obsessed with bringing that future to the present every day, they've always been there. And the job of the capital provider, the venture capitalist, is to find them. It's not the other way around. It is absolutely that capital follows ideas. It always has, and it always will. So we're going to take a little bit of a history lesson here. Ecosystem economics is what we refer to as the design of how Europe can keep its ecosystems in Europe. And the influences on ecosystem economics are those right there on the screen. How many of you have read some Carlota Perez? Any Carlota Perez readers? One or two, not very good. So after you read my book, Welcome to Entrepreneur Country, I really would appreciate if you would pick up The Theory of Disruptive Technology and Adoption by Carlota Perez. She is a Venezuelan economist. She happens to be a Marxist, so we disagree there. But she's a very smart woman who went to Silicon Valley in 1971 to study oil, as you do if you're a Venezuelan economist. And what she found is she found the Intel microprocessor bursting into the consciousness of Silicon Valley, and she became very interested indeed with what was going on. And she very helpfully has looked at the past 300 years for all of us to see that basically the same thing happens again and again. And you can see here some of her work that the centers of these 60 to 80 year cycles go from a big bang in the lower left-hand corner to a new common sense emerging at the end of the 60 to 80 year cycle. So if I go back, you can see that each of these periods of time started in a particular ground zero. They came to be known as a particular period of time. There was a disruptive technology at the beginning, and basically by the end of it, a new common sense emerges. Now, I personally find that very reassuring, because what that tells me is that I don't need to understand the cosmos. I need to study history. And that the same thing happens again and again, that there is a design to what is happening. And Carlota Perez says two things which I think are really interesting that I want to share with you this morning. First of all, the second half of the cycle is when the Goliath, the establishment, embraces those derivative technologies and embeds them, right? The empire does strike back. The empire always strikes back. The second thing that she says is particularly interesting for all of us here at Web Summit and what we do next, is she says, if society is having the right conversation, the cycle is 60 years. If everybody, not just the people at Web Summit, but the people who are down at Starbucks serving us coffee, if everybody understands that the socioeconomic establishment embracing the digital Davids, Goliath and David dancing, if they understand how important that is, that prosperity rips through society, it's better to have a 60-year cycle than to have an 80-year cycle. 80 years means a lot of people get wealthy in the short term, but overall society doesn't benefit as much, as deep, as fast, right? So that's what Carlota Perez tells us, and that there is a life cycle to the technological revolution, and it's more or less the same thing all the time. So all of these really important companies are data points in something bigger that happened. So the revolution, and it's always a revolution, starts with a small fact, right? With a big promise. Not everybody was in Silicon Valley, and frankly, not everybody in Silicon Valley understood what was going on. But with a historical perspective, we can put it into perspective. So in 1999, when I founded First Tuesday, and I took that across Europe, and we were connecting digital entrepreneurs, everybody felt that the Davids were going to kind of kill the establishment, and it didn't quite work out that way. But right now, the dynamic is very much that David and Goliath need to dance. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about why I think that's true. And I need you to keep on thinking back to that third version of the future. Because the reality of the situation is, as a venture capitalist, I back companies. And what is a startup but a revenue-generating algorithm? Entrepreneurs know something about how to monetize the future, right? They understand certain things. And on the left-hand side there, you see ecosystem economics. They understand that they've got to organize the economics of the ecosystem that they're going into, because that's where they're going to get their power. They understand that consumer data is what it's all about. All services are being built on that. Companies are shifting from shifting product to building revenue per users. Network orientation. But they start in the pit of vulnerability, because no matter who you are or how much money you have, you are always vulnerable at the start of your journey as an entrepreneur. But what entrepreneurs need and what startups need is they need a route to market. They're a digital car and they need a highway. Now, every large company could be a highway, but how many times do you hear a startup saying, oh my God, I need to go to market with the Royal Mail, right? They don't necessarily think that way. They think, I need to be on an app store, right? I need to go to Palo Alto, right? However, all of these non-tech traditional incumbent businesses, communications companies, banks, insurers, retailers, all of them have customers that could be a route to market. And frankly, those Goliath businesses that have customers, they need the digital enablers. They need the Davids to help them figure out how to leverage their assets. So as startups move across the curve, we can plot every business that we've ever invested in or sold on that grid there. The first half of the grid on the left-hand side is when the startups are particularly susceptible and vulnerable. If the Goliaths underestimate them long enough, they get across the grid. They get to the network effects. They build financial value. They don't just sell for strategic value anymore at the upper left-hand side. They actually build financial value and get network effects in the industry. And I'll never forget when we first started working with Skype, I think it was about February 2004, I was on BBC and I was sitting right next to the CEO of an incumbent telco. And as they asked me which was our newest hot company, I said, well, we started working with these founders of Skype, peer-to-peer technology, et cetera. And the CEO of the incumbent telco cuts me off live on air and he says, you're going to lose your shirt and they're going to go bust. I thought, how fascinating. You've decided to underestimate the entrepreneur who disrupted the entire music industry with Kazaa. He is so glad you are underestimating him. You're giving him time to get across the grid. Guy was speechless, didn't know what I was talking about, because he'd never seen the David and Goliath grid before, right? Large companies consistently and systematically underestimate startups. It is a huge advantage when somebody underestimates you. But we're here to get past that, because if instead of keeping the startups on life support, the Goliaths can embrace the Davids, then we can make those Goliaths become platform companies and keep them as the heart of ecosystems in Europe. So ecosystem economics is about engaging with your natural allies. And I think we all have to recognize in a network-based world, it's not a function of how smart you are or how hard you work exclusively. It is about whether or not you identify and work with your natural allies in going to market. And that's what we mean, and I'm going to give you some examples of that. So it's fundamentally about economics. It's not about technology. Now, this is a very standard import from the technology world, but you have to understand that this looks like gobbledygook to a lot of people that come from traditional industries. And getting them to understand that the platforms are where the money's being made. If you're not fundamentally imposing your business model or organizing the economics of the industry, guess what? Somebody else is on you. So if you're investing in infrastructure and not also a platform, somebody's using your assets and not paying a toll. What is the net neutrality debate except somebody's building the infrastructure and somebody else is using it and not paying for it, right? So the companies have power by becoming platforms, by organizing the economics of those ecosystems. They do that by engaging with the application economy, and by building digital P&Ls. So this is really the crux of the matter. Entrepreneurs understand that left-hand side of the slide. They understand unit economics. They're re-engineering, fundamentally, transactions in industries. Most large companies, most large enterprises are fixated on their macro. What's my share price? I'm a leader in the industry. How am I going to be a leader in the industry 10 years from now? The answer is always, in entrepreneur country, with the entrepreneur, with the unit economics, with the business model. How is that transaction changing? And here's where consumer data comes in. We all know that consumer data is the starting point for all of these applications and services. Now imagine if our data was actually a legal asset of our own. So it's fundamentally by iterating around the unit economics on that left-hand side of the curve, of the slide, that we change our macro side of the picture if we're a large company. So imagine a world where you can get a credit card or onto the housing ladder where you had no assets. Now imagine a world where everything you do is part of your aggregated personal transactional ability. That's the world that we're building at Entrepreneur Country, is where everyone who becomes a citizen of Entrepreneur Country in the future, we're going to simulate it in Entrepreneur Country, but basically I think it's just a question of when it comes to the real world, has an aggregated personal transactional ability where they have upside as a result of their data. Now, in closing, I want to mention that I think that the design of how Europe wins and the technology community and the venture capital community is, I think there's a lot to be said for birth order. And I just want to give you two examples there. Back to that third version of the future. If European companies just try to imitate the first and the second version of the future, it's like telling your daughter who's good at ballet to go play football. It's just not going to work. The timing is off. We're 15 years later compared to the first version of the future, 8 years later compared to the second version of the future. The time has moved on. We're in that part of the Carlota Perez cycle where the empire strikes back. It is today, without question, no bad reflection on anything other than it's a time where the empire strikes back by embracing the derivative technologies. I think of Europe as an eldest child. Regardless of what you think about the social welfare state and so forth, the fact is that Europe is an eldest child. It values the estate. It sees a value in the existing industry. That doesn't mean that we don't have digital disruptors here. Every industry is being disrupted. But what I think Europe does extremely well is enable and extend existing industry. Now, as a venture capitalist, that's extremely positive because at the unit economics level, it's more capital efficient to enable and extend the existing industry than to throw a lot of money at it and hope that at some point you're going to make money by getting it out on NASDAQ. So we sold a business to Google about 5 years ago. And the entrepreneur, John Paleomolites, had a fundamental insight that if you incentivize people for the use of their data, that they would change their behavior. Google came looking in the financial services price comparison space. They went right over Money Supermarket. They went right over all of these other businesses, and they basically honed in on Beat That Quote, which only had 250,000 pounds of EBITDA. This was not a company that had huge financial value. It was at the strategic value side of the David and Goliath grid. I think I'm at my end. We sold that business to Google for 122 times EBITDA multiple, far beyond the financial value of the company. Just to wrap up here, industries are being transformed by digital business models. In 2015, network benefits accrue to the firms who understand their role in the ecosystem and organize the economics for it. This in turn leads to shareholder benefits. So if you don't we don't want to go to Palo Alto, we want to go to Entrepreneur Country. We don't want to be building the faster horse, we want to be building the car. And fundamentally, the message that I want to leave you with, sorry, I'm going to flip through here because I'm at the end of my slides, is remember that David wins. David wins because he sees the future, and that's what we're doing at Entrepreneur Country, is bringing the future to the present. Thank you very much. And if you want a copy of the slides, send me an email.